The Spinoff Podcast Network.
K-pop to me means more than just listening to music. It's learning to be myself.
The Spinoff's new documentary, K-Pollies, follows 3 Pacific youth obsessed with K-pop. In a one-off documentary, see what they've found in Korean pop culture and how they bridge it with their own.
When you start dressing, looking different, everyone side-eyes you. But in K-pop, they're just like, no, like celebrate yourself.
Watch K-Pollies today at thespinoff.co.nz/videos. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is brought to you by SparkLab, offering inspiration and practical advice to help businesses find their edge. To hear more about SparkLab, including details about the latest events, workshops, and business tools, visit sparklab.co.nz. And now, here's your host, Simon Pound.
You're listening to Business is Boring, a podcast that reckons it's anything but. Business is Boring is made by the Spinoff with help from Callaghan Innovation, New Zealand's innovation agency. Here's your host, Simon Pound.
We talk to a lot of people on this show about what it takes to make an idea successful. But one part that doesn't always get raised, but that I think is one of the top factors, is getting access to the right capital at the right time. Not getting access to the funds at the right time to grow equals failure. Getting capital that demands you do the wrong things spells trouble. Getting capital and not spending it well spells even worse trouble. It's an industry where one win can carry 10 losses, and changes in markets, technology and personnel can turn a surefire bet into a tanker, and vice versa. It's an area that fascinates me. People like the team from A16Z have done a great job in popularising the founder-centric VC and approach. And the way some of their influences have been portrayed on shows like Silicon Valley mean that the VC and pop culture is seen as a big, exciting chase. But what's it really like? What kind of people can do it? And if you're a company with a big dream, how do you get a top VC behind you? Well, today's guest is here to help. John Henderson is a partner at one of Australasia's leading VC firms, Airtree. They have investments in great companies like 90 Seconds, Canva, Prosper and Joyous, who we've had on the show. John came back to Australia after being a founding principal at transatlantic venture firm White Star Capital, where they invested in some companies you've certainly heard of, like Dollar Shave Club. And he got into VC through being part of successful companies like Sumly and Facebook, and early in his career, management consulting. To talk what it's like and how it works, John joins us now. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Simon.
Hey, so kind of to take a couple of steps back before getting into venture capital, tell me a bit about your career beforehand. I saw in your bio on the site that you said that you started out by founding Bush Campus, which didn't work out, but you've said that it taught you more than a lot of the things that did. Tell me about that.
Oh gosh, that's a lot of steps back. So Bush Campus was a business I co-founded straight out of university. Our mission was to create an outdoor recreation and development camp for high school students. And by development, I mean personal development. So we would take them out into the bush, put them through very difficult experiences, and then work on both the physical and mental with the hope of growing young men and women. And it was an amazing journey. I co-founded it with a friend of mine from university. His father, in fact, owned a ski lodge up near Thredbo in New South Wales, and so we took advantage of that and used some of those facilities from which to build a summer camp. And we constructed facilities. We had 15, 20 people working at any given time. We had thousands of students come through the program. It was a transformational experience for me from a management perspective, from a working with other people perspective, from a motivating staff perspective. The labourers on the construction side are a very different type of management challenge to very smart people in a management consulting firm. And so I learned a ton. As you say, it didn't work out, and I think think that was for a few reasons. The key of which was I thought I was going into business with a friend and co-founder, when in fact I was going into business with a friend and his father. And I think I learned a lot about dealing with families and getting economics aligned and sort of complementary skill sets and that kind of thing. But 2 or 3 years of my life not wasted, but it's not Facebook either.
And I guess that's one of the big things you can draw from an experience like that if you're going to put all of your heart, soul and energy into something, it's got to be something that's set for scale and that you have enough control over all the elements that you can actually make it work.
I think that's right. I mean, I'm not sure it needs to be set for scale. There's plenty of great businesses that remain 3, 4, 5 person enterprises and they live a very comfortable and happy existence and are in control of their own destiny. So, we're going to talk about venture later, and I think that comes with a specific risk profile and specific kind of requirements about how big you have to be. Bush Campus wasn't so much one of those businesses. We took some debt, but certainly no rocket fuel. But you do have to have the right team in place, and you have to have your economics perfectly aligned, and we failed on the latter point.
And then an area that you got into, which I'm kind of fascinated with, in the same way I'm fascinated with VC, is management consulting. And it's another one of these industries that has this reputation of kind of, young kind of like masters of the universe coming in and changing companies and shaking things up and kind of analysing industries. And it seems to be like a very exciting, hard-working, taking an Excel spreadsheet and changing the world kind of environment. What's it actually like compared to that kind of stereotype?
Yeah, it's interesting you describe it that way. I think the fashionable thing for people in my position to do is be a bit dismissive of their management consulting roots and just say, we were just spreadsheet junkies or good at making PowerPoint slides. I actually loved it. I had a great time at the Boston Consulting Group, and it was partly because it was just a magnet for very, very smart people who were a little bit lost. A number of the people I worked with have gone on to impressive academic careers. Others have founded their own businesses. Others have gone on. One is a judge now. There's this. One is a plastic surgeon now. So that it attracts this diaspora of really interesting, motivated people who just don't really know what they want to do. And I think that confluence of minds and interests leads to, a really healthy organisation internally, but also some new perspectives on the businesses that we worked with, and hopefully some insights for them. So I had a great time at the Boston Consulting Group, and it was fascinating working with super smart people on really challenging problems, but also a little bit frustrating in the sense that you would provide advice to one of your clients. And then just wander off into the sunset and sort of leave them to their own devices. And that, I sort of, as someone, I guess, who tried to build his own thing and knew what it was like to have his hands on the tools, I found it stimulating to look at the problems, but frustrating not to be able to execute against them.
Yeah, that's a remarkable thing, isn't it? That idea of you have to become, I guess, so invested in the company and its challenge and how you'd like to change that, and then you give them the presentation and watch either nothing happen or it get executed not exactly as you would have, but you're already out of the game by then.
That's right, and if nothing happens, it's your fault, and if it gets executed and goes great, then obviously management takes all the credit for that, which is fine, but not being able to tangibly point to something that you've done, I found frustrating in the end. But the process and the people around it, I would recommend to anyone.
And it's such an interesting place where when there's so much effort put into specialisation, especially kind of in the first 10 years of people's careers, to be able to have that kind of generalist role and bring curiosity, insights from other areas and disciplines, not even being linked to one industry necessarily, where, people have to kind of specialise in, whatever kind of vertical that they've found themselves in. And that seems kind of invigorating as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I remember I did 3 projects in a row where I worked for Sydney Airport on the first one. Then I worked for Wesfarmers on a supermarket chain. And then I worked for News Corp on their thinking around digitising from print media to the iPad at that time. So there's 3 just completely different industries, completely different problems, and bringing some commonalities and perspectives to them, but you really had to be on your mental game.
And I'll bet some of that kind of cross-sector, wider thinking comes in later in the VC world. But before you got there, tell me where you went next, because you were quite early on and working with Facebook as it was kind of finding its world, linking up with other apps and other things that people use in their life, hey?
Yeah, that's right. So I was part of the partnerships team at Facebook in Europe. So I was based in their London office. Not super early days, but much earlier than now. So we were a couple of thousand people while I was there. And Facebook's a big part of Facebook's strategy then as now is integrating with other companies who need to leverage the social graph for their growth. And so in Europe, for example, we did partnerships with groups like Spotify. You may remember 5, 6, 7 years ago that all of your friends were annoying you by showing all of the songs that they were listening to in the right-hand side of their newsfeed. That was an integration that I worked on. We did an integration with TripAdvisor where all of a sudden you could see, rather than seeing that Jimmy457 thought that a hotel was great, you saw that your friend Peter thought the hotel was great, and that obviously had a greater social proof and relevance to you, which made TripAdvisor more powerful, but it also made Facebook more valuable. And we also did media partnerships. So we did a big partnership with the BBC, for example, around the London Olympics in 2012. So a bunch of different partnership with different organisations, all of whom could take advantage of Facebook's scale and network for their own benefits.
And those partnerships as well ended up being super influential, didn't they, in terms of the Facebook kind of the like button that appeared around the internet and the login that let you access other sites meant that Facebook's advertising was able to know what users were doing elsewhere and become much more valuable as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, look, that's fair, and that's something that obviously they're being challenged on today. I think at that time, and we're talking 2011, 2012, this was all about making Facebook a more valuable and useful experience. And obviously the like button and the OAuth, so the login into sites, just made the internet a more seamless experience, to be honest. I mean, you didn't need to have 17 passwords for all of the different sites that you accessed. The Facebook OAuth was a valuable and useful thing for users. It had the side benefit, obviously, of making advertising more targetable, and that's Facebook's business model. But I don't think, certainly I never experienced anything nefarious about that. I think Facebook gets a tough rap in the media these days that it's it's this big money grabbing machine that's done everything to target ads at you unfairly. I think Facebook fundamentally always has been focused on the user and building a great user experience. And certainly when I was there, Mark's focus was very much on product, and advertising was almost a necessary evil to him to support that. So they're going through some difficult times today, and some of those come out of some of the partnerships that they've done, obviously. But certainly when I was there, the intention was focused on making a great experience for the user rather than anything nefarious around rigging elections.
I think if you take a couple of steps back and look at the way that Facebook is being held to the standards of media companies, because it's, kind of lifted a lot of the advertising that used to support media companies. But those standards that media companies have, they didn't happen overnight. They were things that were kind of like they evolved and were hard fought for because of kind of overreach and missteps. And perhaps that's just the process that now Facebook is going through as well.
Yeah, look, I think they're in a really difficult position. They fundamentally are a platform, right? So all of the content on Facebook is created by their users, whether that be videos posted or opinions posted or anything that could be offensive is not from an editor or a writer paid by Facebook. It's by someone who logged on with a free account, which may or not even be them. And then they're being held to defamation standards and having other, regulations imposed on them like a normal newspaper would, which is kind of okay if you're a newspaper and you have editorial control over what's on your site. But if you're Facebook and you have millions of posts a minute, I have some sympathy for them about how difficult it is to manage that. And so obviously there's a huge effort these days, both human and algorithmic, in sorting, preventing and blocking content. But it's a monumental challenge, and I think it's not just Facebook, right? Like YouTube, Twitter, a whole bunch of the other platforms have this issue. But how we deal with this will be important for the sort of democratic dialogue, and obviously has implications for elections and free speech. So I don't know the answer, but I do have some sympathy for challenges that the CEOs of these companies are facing.
And they are, as such significant entities with billions of users and people, they are the questions of our time now, aren't they? And I suppose after having worked there, you spend the rest of your life having to have conversations about it with people who are like, "Oh, thanks for the election."
No, I love it. Look, I think where it gets really hard is two things, right? Like, one is things that just absolutely shouldn't be broadcast. So, mass shootings that get live broadcast on the platform is a huge issue. The other is impersonation. There have been, particularly on YouTube, there have been a number of deepfakes where, a famous celebrity has been put onto the body of a porn actor, for example. And then that gets broadcast live and people interpret it to be real. And so I think, there's a few different areas where these things are being live streamed or just shared later and causing real issues for individuals and society. But there are also benefits to the ability to live stream your opinion. So where that balance gets struck, and it would be a shame, I think, to not allow live streaming just because it has a few fringe problems. But those fringe problems are real, so dealing with them is a big challenge.
Yeah, and the way that YouTube seems to be dealing with it at the moment by saying that you can only live stream if you have 100 subscribers, which is their new take on that, seems to be quite a good mechanism, maybe compared to things where it's like you only can't if you've shown past issues, but I don't know. Let's not get into the guts of that.
Yeah.
Hey, and then in terms of the VC, there are a couple of kind of ways that people can come to being a VC, and one that's very kind of well known is by being a founder or deeply involved or integral in kind of a company that's run through a VC process, of rounds and building a company and maybe going to an exit. And that was your way in, wasn't it, with Sumly?
Yeah, sort of. So, I mean, I didn't found Sumly. I joined very early in the journey before we'd launched a product. Sumly was a unique company in the sense that our founder, Nick D'Aloisio, was 16 when I joined him. And that came with challenges and benefits, obviously. But he was an exceptional young man and built a team around him and attracted venture capitalists and a bunch of very high-profile angel investors. When we raised the first round for Sumly, this was the time when party rounds were a real thing, and we had this kind of who's who of interesting people behind us, from Stephen Fry to Ashton Kutcher to Brian Chesky, Yoko Ono, Rupert Murdoch. It was this remarkable group of people who joined to help. And they were all kind of backing into this vision that we had at Sumly, which was that we could algorithmically summarize content everywhere and anywhere. And this is at the time when smartphones were on their way up, but not necessarily ubiquitous yet. And so one of the big questions in the internet was, how do you consume content that's been designed for a desktop screen on a mobile? And Nick had designed a summarization algorithm which could essentially take content of any length and bring it down to 4, 5, 6 sentences. And so our vision was, well, look, you just take all of the content on the internet and bring it down to a mobile screen algorithmically. And so we started with the news, because that's a great daily use case. You don't need the summary to be great to get the gist of the news, but you want a bit more than the headline. And off we went. We won a couple of Apple Design Awards, raised venture capital, as I said, firstly from a bunch of angel investors and then from Horizons Ventures. And the rest is history.
That really does sound like quite the party round. What an interesting bunch of people behind it. What led you, as someone who was successfully working in a pretty important part of Facebook and had this background, to want to jump in and work for a company founded by a 16-year-old? That would have been, I guess, quite a big decision to make.
Huge decision. Coming from Bush Campus, I obviously had unfinished business with the startup world and aspirations to either start or be part of something from the very beginning and see it through to success. So I'd always wanted to either start something again or join something in the early days. And I think when I met Nick, I just knew there was something special about him. At 16, he self-taught, had created a summarization algorithm. He'd built a prototype of the app, which I thought was just spectacular. The use case was interesting. And I just wanted to be part of his story. And this is, I think, we'll talk later about what we look for in founders. But I think in Nick, I saw the magnetism, the charisma, the technical capability, the product vision, every box in my eyes before I was a venture capitalist was ticked as far as this is someone I'd want to work for, and that's a criteria I use today. So a huge decision to join him, but I think it was, you've got to take some risks in your life, and that was a calculated risk that obviously worked out, but it was really a bet on a person, and Nick, delivered on that.
What was the arc of the company? So that was an idea that was very much kind of contextual for its time, and you had great backing. Was it kind of a couple of rounds and an exit, or was it kind of a pivot? Like, what kind of journey did you go through as a company?
Yeah, so no pivots, fortunately. 2 funding rounds and then an exit. So we ended up being acquired by Yahoo in 2013. And that was an interesting juncture in the company's history. There was, transparently, we've never really talked about this, but there was internally some division about whether the exit was the right path for us or whether we really should have pushed on. When we were acquired, we had this option of, firstly, the algorithm we had was language agnostic. So we were just about to launch into Portuguese, Spanish, Mandarin, and a couple of other languages. That would have expanded our market straight away. And then we were considering various other options beyond news. As you may remember, the vision was to summarise literally all of the content in the world, and so we were going to do that vertical by vertical. So we had a pretty solid roadmap and a pretty clear path ahead of us. But by the same token, Nick at that time was almost 18, had a very large amount of money put in front of him by one of the world's leading technology companies, and that was a transformational decision for anyone, but particularly for him at his point. And so I think his personal circumstances, as much as anything, dictated the timing of the exit.
And having been through that process as someone involved in the company, what kind of insight does that give you when you're dealing with founders and teams? Because, successes, when you look back on them, become obvious, but it's never obvious at any point through a journey, is it? Especially when you're growing ahead of revenue or you're making something that's never been made before. It's not as simple as, you should have held on or you shouldn't have.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And I think if somebody taught me nothing else, it's empathy for the entrepreneurial journey. Startups are portrayed externally as a few TechCrunch headlines, a couple of funding rounds, maybe a product launch and an exit, and it's kind of smooth sailing the whole way. And we had our share of highlights at Sumley, obviously, but day to day it was mayhem. We were hiring as quickly as we could. I remember one day we were globally featured by Apple, which is huge if you're an app back then, and I think we had 400,000 or 500,000 downloads in a day or two, and all of our servers broke. And so literally we had 500,000 people come onto our app and just get a zero experience. And you can imagine, we were awake for 36 hours trying to fix things with duct tape and rubber bands, and it was just chaos. And that roller coaster of lows and highs is, I think, fundamental to the startup journey, but it takes a specific mentality and cohesive team to get through that.
That sounds very much like the idea of Silicon Valley as a documentary, doesn't it? That sounds very much like that show, which obviously has its broader moments, but yeah, it really does capture some of those ups and downs of the technology.
Yeah, that show is spookily accurate sometimes.
And tell me about White Star Capital. And so that is something that you were a founding principal at, and as mentioned in the intro, like investments in companies like Dollar Shave Club that went on to have a $1 billion exit. Extraordinary kind of companies to go. What led you to jump into setting up your own transatlantic VC firm?
Yeah, look, I'd love to take credit for this being a well thought out path, and actually for the firm being mine, and neither of those things are true. When we got acquired at Sumley, I actually went back to my old boss at Facebook, who was running EMEA, which is essentially the rest of the world for Facebook, and he'd made the intro to Nick in the first place, so I took him out to lunch to say thank you. And he, at that time, Facebook had been through its IPO, and he was sort of thinking about what was next for him, and he decided that he wanted to get into venture with a business partner of his based in New York. And I was out of a job, trying to figure out what was next. And so it was just a lucky happenstance of timing that he asked me to join him on that journey. And so Christian, my old boss, and Eric, his business partner, were the founding partners of White Star, and then I joined them on day one as a founding principal. And so we went and raised a venture fund and started investing it. And I think that as well, I talked about Sumley giving me empathy for the entrepreneurial journey. I think the beginning of White Star did as well, actually. I mean, you imagine startups raising a seed or a Series A round are looking for $1 million or $3 million or $5 million, which, don't get me wrong, is challenging and a very difficult thing to pull off. But first-time venture fund looking for $70 million on a team and no product is kind of the same experience, right? And so, we spent 12 months talking to a whole bunch of sources of capital and eventually pulled together a fund and made some great investments. But it was a painful slog, and I think I appreciate the pain of the funding journey, as much as anyone. And so as a VC today, I try and treat founders with the respect and speed that they deserve, because I've been through that journey a couple of times now, and it sucks.
And I guess there's that idea which you have mentioned, that when you look at a company coming to you, you're looking for the team as much as anything else. And yeah, as you mentioned there, you don't have a product except your future decisions, which is very hard to draw a particularly accurate graph about.
Well, you have your future decisions and your track record.
Yeah.
In Airtree's case, we've been lucky enough to raise funds reasonably quickly because we have a track record of 17 exits and a couple of successful funds, which you can point to, and they're no guarantee of future success, obviously, but you can at least point to them as some proxy for the fact that we know what we're doing. In White Star's case, we were all first-timers, and so it was literally a team and some angel investments, and so you can understand why a big institution is reluctant to just casually hand over $25 million to a group of people who say they're going to do great things.
What have you loved about venture capital? Like, what's kept you interested? Because it's a brutal kind of race, isn't it? You're competing for companies. You've got to be aware of everything happening. You're there for all the highs and lows. That you've got to live with so much uncertainty. It's not a particularly easy job to do, is it?
Oh, look, it's by no means an easy job to do, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't want to compare it to what the founders have to do every day. I have the luxury, I guess, of sitting across a portfolio of investments and getting to work with all of them through the highs and lows. But if you're a founder on that journey, you've got one company, your identity is tied up in it, all of your net worth is tied up in it. You've got, 10, 20, 100 people who are dependent on you. You're dependent on your success to keep them, buying dinner for their family and kids. So I don't want to cry poor or apologise for how challenging my days are compared to the people I work with. But in terms of what keeps me interested, I think I'm one of those people with intellectual ADD. I love working for great people on different challenges, and I think VC is unique in the sense that I can literally call up the most interesting people in Australia and New Zealand and ask them to tell me about the future, and then, in some cases, ask them for the opportunity to work with them for the next 10 years. And that's pretty amazing.
So how do you talk us through how you go about doing that? So you've got to be aware of things coming up, and so how do you keep up to date with the companies, and how do companies come into your radar, and what kind of things lead you to want to get to know more about them?
So how do we keep up to date? I mean, part of the job sort of forces us to be up to date, if you like. So if you think about how I spend my days, half of my day, most days, would be spent speaking to founders who are literally building the future. And so part of it is learning about their company and seeing whether it might be a fit for investment for us. But the other, as a result of that, I'm sitting in a room for 3, 4, 5 hours a day having founders tell me about where the world's going. And so actually I learn a lot just literally on the tools in those meetings. We spend a whole bunch of time doing thematic research into areas that we're interested in. And a lot of our investments come out of that. And so, in my case, I spend a lot of time on machine learning. I try and meet companies building neural networks to do a whole bunch of different things. And then, we've made a bunch of investments from thematic to HyperAnna to MetaOptima to Earth AI, sort of across different industries based on that technology. So we'll do thematic research, we'll talk to founders, we attend conferences, we read the news, we talk to a lot of scientists. There's a whole bunch of different things we do, but you're right that being across what's happening and where the world is going is kind of critical to what we do.
And then, it's such a thing in pop culture, the kind of the chase for the round and the term sheets and this, that and the other. But, in terms of the actual kind of like amount of, the stuff you do in your job, I can't imagine that's a huge part of it compared to keeping up with companies once they've done it and finding companies on the way in. How big a part is that? And then what happens once you've got a company that you're working with?
So the sort of fable of the competitive round, that happens sometimes. There are, I think I led an investment into an education business called Inquisitive. I think they had 5 term sheets when we invested. And so that was a competitive process where all of the investors were pitching Tim, the founder, on, how they could add more value to his business. And we were lucky enough that he chose us. I would say that's the exception rather than the rule, though. In most of the cases where we've made investments, we've actually known the entrepreneurs for 12, 18, 24 months ahead of an investment. And I think that's actually really important from our perspective, obviously, because we get to know them, but also it's even more important for them, the founder's perspective. And the reason for that is that venture capitalists are the one set of employees you can't fire. And typically you'll be working with us for 5, 10, maybe longer than that, like a large number of years. And if you think about it, the average Australian or Kiwi marriage lasts 6 or 7 years, right? So your VC investment is longer than a marriage. And so it sort of seems remarkable to me that that some entrepreneurs would want to meet a VC as they were fundraising, have a couple of meetings, take the money, and then off they go. I think we all talk about adding value in different ways beyond the capital that we provide, and entrepreneurs talk about wanting that. I would have thought as an entrepreneur you'd want to experience that. And so, in our perfect world, and this is with 2 most recent investments we've made, a secure code warrior and a cloud guru, and I think in both of those cases we knew the founders for more than 24 months each. And they were competitive rounds in the sense that those founders could have raised money from a lot of different people, but they weren't competitive in the sense that there wasn't a defined formal process of those rounds. We'd literally been working with Sam and a cloud guru and Peter at Secure Code Warrior for 24 months. In Secure Code Warrior's case, we'd hired a couple of people into his business before investing. And we'd worked with them on strategy, on introducing customers, on a whole bunch of different things. And so I think when it came to thinking about capital, we were the obvious partner because we'd built that relationship and they'd seen what it was like to work with us. So circling right back to your original question, sometimes there is a really competitive process around a round, but I think our preferred scenario, and hopefully the investments that work out as well, if not better, are long-term relationships ahead of taking money.
And I guess those relationships also, when you've got the numbers in VC, the famous kind of like power rules and the like 1 out of 10 will be so big it'll carry the 3 that fail and 3 will break even and 3 might give you a little return or something. And, you hear those kind of stories. Is that actually broadly accurate, or is that just, across the whole industry? Are there certain companies that do better than that? And when you're dealing with people, are you kind of like, it's probably easier sitting above it and going, well, some of these will work and some of these won't. But it can't be that easy if you're in one of the ones that isn't going that well.
Look, it's certainly true that that breakout companies return funds many times over. And, you see this with Uber's IPO at the moment, I think, has returned Benchmark's fund almost 20 times. Same for first round. Facebook returned Accel's fund many fold over. So where you're in a true breakout company, that's game changing. And in those examples, the rest of your portfolio, I don't want to say doesn't matter, but it one company just outshines the rest. Our view is that that's great if you can pull it off, and you'd love to be in breakout companies like that. And in our fund, we've got Canva looks like that, Prosper looks like that. There's a few other companies that are kind of on track to do that. But we don't subscribe to the mentality of, okay, it's fine if 3 companies fail. Because in saying that, what that means is 3 of the founding teams you're working with will have to get rid of all of their employees and go back to who knows what, and their lives will fall apart, and it has real consequences in real lives. And so I think I get kind of disappointed when the industry just talks about, okay, there's going to be some zeros and that's fine, because that ignores the human reality of what happens when these businesses fail. And so we find ourselves spending a lot more of our time relatively on the companies that are struggling than perhaps we should, and that perhaps economics would dictate. But I think that's the that's the human reality, and we hate to see companies go to zero because that's a bad outcome for founders, it's a bad outcome for employees, it's a bad outcome for us, but it's worse for the people whose lives are reliant on these companies.
How does a company, like if someone is interested in a space that they think that you might be interested in, say, AI, machine learning kind of area potentially, do people just drop you an email? Like or do you like to have people recommend things to you, or what's the way that works?
Yeah, this is the great irony of our job. We sit around internally going, how do we meet more great companies? And then obviously founders sit around saying, how do we meet these VCs? And so it's this weird process where oftentimes we'll reach out to companies that we're interested in. But in terms of incoming signals, we look, the thing we take most seriously is a recommendation from one of the founders we already work with. If an Airtree founder introduces anyone to me, I'll take that meeting and take it really seriously. But then we have a whole bunch of other signals we look for. Anyone in our network, whether it be other co-investors, angel investors, that kind of thing that we work with. We work closely with a number of technology organisations who make suggestions to us from time to time. We attend conferences, we speak at conferences, we go and listen to people at conferences, and we'll come up to you in the audience or vice versa. So we try and make ourselves as approachable and as accessible as possible. But by the same token, obviously, we meet 3,500 businesses each year. So, we have to filter in some way. And so we look for these signals to do that. But I guess the other topic that's relevant here now that we're talking about this is if you just rely on your internal filters, you can entrench biases and prejudices that you already have. And so we're really cognizant of that and trying to be available to the inbound, we try and be available to the email at community@airtree.vc and people who won't come in through our natural networks, but we do have to filter in some way, and that's part of the challenge.
What advice do you have for people who are interested in getting into VC? Because I guess be part of a really successful company and exit is not the easiest thing to necessarily work out. And some companies do have partners who are, or people working in venture capital who aren't from that exited a big kind of company background, are they?
No, and you don't have to be, right? We think that that having been involved in startups gives you an empathy and some experience that's relevant to founders. But some of the great VCs in the world don't have that. Fred Wilson has been a VC all of his life, and if you're a founder, you'd happily take Union Square Ventures money. I think Bill Gurley was an equities analyst prior to becoming a partner at Benchmark. So there are great VCs who don't have that founding or that operational background, and I think you can come from anywhere. In terms of what advice I would give to people who wanted to get into venture, first of all, it's a tiny industry. I mean, there are maybe a couple of dozen jobs in Australia and New Zealand that are interesting in venture. So it's hard. I think the best path, in my view, is to go and work for a venture-backed company or found a venture-backed company, obviously, because I think that at least gives you a taste of the speed of growth, the execution, kind of the chaos that ensues, that will give you some relevance when you're then investing in those companies. And then, in the same way that founders should come and relationship build with us for 12, 24 months ahead of taking our money, if you're interested in coming and working with us, the same story applies. Come and have a few coffees with us. Let's talk about some companies that you're interested in. We'll do the same thing. And if there's a meeting of the minds, then you never know.
Very cool, very cool. And how do you define success? So having been part of a few different things that are successful in different ways and being a supporter to other people's success, but it also ends up being kind of your success or failure. What's your definition of success?
My personal benchmark for success are founder references. I think that, as someone who's youngish into my venture career, I've only been investing for 6 years now, and who's looking to invest for 30 plus years, I think what's going to make or break me is having great founders stand up for me. And, when I'm trying to invest in a company or when I'm trying to convince another great founder that they should work with me, I think what the existing founders that I partner with, what they say about me is the most important thing for my ongoing success, and probably is the kind of future proxy of how well I'll invest.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, John Henderson, partner at Airtree Ventures, for coming and talking to us today. And if people are interested, you've found a few little ways to kind of get access to VC now. Thank you for sharing your story.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much to Tina Dilla for producing, and thank you very much for having us along and listening.
You've been listening to Business is Boring, presented by Simon Pound. And brought to you by the Spinoff and Callaghan Innovation.
From the Spinoff Podcast Network, that was Business is Boring, brought to you by SparkLab. Make sure you're following Business is Boring wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information on SparkLab, visit sparklab.co.nz.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.